I'm really pleased to be here to be able to share how I see Buddhism as helping us as we age. And what I'm going to focus on in Buddhism are the three pure precepts. And I see them as serving as guides for us as we age. I vow to cease from evil. I vow to do only good. I vow to do good for others. So the guidance from the first precept, cease from evil, comes from the 10 great Buddhist precepts, and they're very similar to the 10 commandments of Christianity, Islam, and Judaism. Guidance from the second precept, I vow to do only good, tells us and others how to lead a happy and healthy life. But what is the key to leading a happy and healthy life? One thing that has become very clear in the research is the negative power of loneliness. This is a quote from the Harvard study that began tracking the health of 268 Harvard sophomores in 1938 during the Great Depression, and they later added inner city men, so they had a mix of rich and poor, black and white. The researchers hoped they would find, through this longitudinal study, the clues to leading a healthy and happy life, and they got more than they had bargained for. When we gathered together everything we knew about them at the age 50, it wasn't their middle-aged cholesterol levels that predicted how they were going to grow old, said Harvard's Waldinger in a popular TED Talk. It was how satisfied they were with their relationships. The people who were the most satisfied in their relationships at age 50 were the healthiest at age 80. And the opposite of that is loneliness. Loneliness kills. Again, quoting this study, close relationships, more than money or fame, are what keep people happy throughout their lives, the study revealed. Those ties protect people from life's discontents, help to delay mental and physical decline, and are better predictors of long and happy lives than social class, IQ, or even genes. So we do good by building close relationships that lead to a happy and healthy life for ourselves and for others. But what is most important in finding and keeping a long-term partner, for example? The author of Love Factually, Duana Welch, wrote this about finding a partner for a long-term, close, loving relationship. Quote, if you had to summarize over 60 years of excellent relationship research in just one sentence, that sentence would be, if you can find and be someone kind and respectful, your relationship will probably work, and if you can't, it won't. Once you find a partner, it turns out that kindness makes a loving marriage stay loving for a long time. Professor John Gottman and his team at the University of Washington interviewed and observed 130 newlywed couples over a single weekend. Based on those 48 hours, he could correctly predict in 80% of the cases whether the couple would be together 6 years later. So what are the really important variables, or what is the single most important variable in a loving, long-lasting marriage? Kindness. Gottman's research has been replicated with straight and gay couples, couples with and without children, and rich and poor couples. What does kindness look like in Gottman's research? In its simplest form, one partner initiates and the other partner responds in a kind fashion. Here are some examples. Giving the partner the benefit of the doubt. For example, if your partner is late, you do not interpret it as a lack of respect or caring. Expressing anger and other negative emotions in a considerate manner. For example, I interpret the sharp tone of your voice to mean I did something to upset you. What was it? Being extra considerate when the partner is having a hard time. For example, when your partner is discouraged and overwhelmed, you offer to carry out some of your partner's responsibilities. Sharing joy. When the partner accomplishes something, you take time to genuinely discuss how wonderful the accomplishment is. In summarizing about 40 years of research, Gottman said, for the hundreds of thousands of couples getting married each June and for the millions of couples currently together, married or not, the lesson from the research is clear. If you want to have a stable, healthy relationship, exercise kindness early and often. There are many more research studies about the importance of kindness. A study of 423 married seniors over a 5-year period found that those who were kindest to each other cut their risk of dying in half. In one surprising study, researchers created literal wounds on the arms of the couples. They actually cut them to create wounds. The couples that were kindest had the wounds physically heal faster. One researcher said the benefits of kindness may be important than what you think, more than regular exercise or even a nutritious diet. The kind habits needed for a loving, long-lasting marriage are also applicable to our relationships with friends, children, grandchildren, and those who are still working, co-workers. One of our most important kind habits is volunteering, and I want to read a little bit about a study that is quite fascinating. Researchers led by Sarah Conrath investigated 50 years worth of data on a random sample of 10,317 Wisconsin residents beginning when they were in high school. The researchers focused on the last 5 of those 50 years. The finding: twice as many non-volunteers died as volunteers. But here's the fascinating part of the study. The researchers identified a separate group of volunteers whose motive was not compassionate kindness. Instead, they volunteered out of a need to increase their status or prestige or be able to brag about it or to meet the right people. In other words, their motives were not out of compassion and caring. The group of volunteers who had motives other than caring died at the same rate as those who did not volunteer at all. So, what's in our heart matters. It affects how we benefit or don't benefit from what seem to be kind actions. What I want you to do is to take a moment. I want you to recall a kindness that you either received or gave someone that really made an impression on you. And what I want you to do is see if you can call up the emotion, how you felt when you received that kindness or when you gave that kindness. So just take a moment and see if you can call up that emotion associated with that kindness. Those positive feelings come from oxytocin, dopamine, and other neurotransmitters surging through your body in response to kindness. The origin of these neurotransmitters in our bodies come from the kindness instinct. One of our 4 basic instincts evolved over hundreds of thousands of years. The other 3 instincts are survival, success, and reproduction. And what you'll see, this is the title of an article in Scientific American. Forget survival of the fittest, it's kindness that counts. Our challenge, whether we're teenagers or are in our 80s, is to dramatically increase the influence that kindness exerts over our other 3 instincts: success, reproduction, and survival. We live in a society that emphasizes success through materialism and individualism. We glamorize sexuality, and we have very little public attention to any significant degree to kindness. So we face an important challenge in being able to elevate our awareness and other people's awareness of the importance of kindness and practicing it. It's important to note that kindness is at the center of all the world's religions. It's usually referred to as the Golden Rule. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you, Matthew 7:12. So this is an interesting study about do unto others or treat yourself. People who are striving to improve their own happiness may be tempted to treat themselves to a spa day, a shopping trip, or a sumptuous dessert. The results of the current study suggest, however, that when happiness seekers are tempted to treat themselves, they might be more successful if they were apt to treat someone else instead. So the people who served, who gave benefit to someone, actually experienced more happiness than those who were indulging their own preferences. But it wasn't science, evolution, and religion that convinced me of the central role kindness plays in doing good for others. Personal experience convinced me. I volunteered at a hospice center. I became a meditation and spiritual mentor to men imprisoned for violent crimes. So through these experiences, I became aware of the tremendous power of mindful kindness in forging caring, respectful, and responsible relationships. So this is Jeremy. In 2010, I was a hospice volunteer who met Jeremy. He was 35 years old with advanced ALS, Lou Gehrig's disease, and had lost 60 pounds of muscle mass in the past 6 months. He had no use of his body below his neck. His earlier life had not been easy. He'd run away from home at age 13 in disgust over the behavior of his mother. His wife broke off their marriage because of his study of meditation and yoga, and later prohibited his 11-year-old daughter from visiting him while he was on his deathbed. Though near death, Jeremy reached out to others in kindness by talking about how blessed his life was. His kindness drew visitors to his bedside. Another hospice volunteer asked me to spend time with Jeremy if I thought it would be okay. And of course I did. People who worked there even spent time by his bedside. He told me that he was like a drop of water in a river. When the river came to a waterfall, many drops separated. He was born as the drops cascaded down. Each drop acted like a prism, sending out light according to the nature of the drop. Some were white, some brown, some black. The water drop returning to the river below signified Jeremy's death. He said, quote, "As long as I live, I want to be a positive force, a light full of love for my people, which is everyone. It does not make any difference what kind of water drop you are. You could be any shape, any size, or any color. I am a very blessed individual to have had so much time to be able to feel and smell, to be able to run and laugh and hurt." That's Roy Tester. I remember Jeremy's kindness, and when I was writing to Roy, suggested that we form a mindful kindness partnership to benefit other prisoners and guards. Kindness had been in short supply in Roy's life. As a child, his father and friends of his father sexually abused him over a number of years with the full knowledge of his mother. Roy ended up murdering his parents. He will spend the rest of his life in the notorious Tucker Maximum Security Prison described in the fact-based Robert Redford movie Brubaker, with his telephone torture machine and 200 unmarked graves found in the land around the prison. Having been repeatedly molested as a child, Roy had a deep hatred toward child molesters. Yet after being part of our mindful kindness partnership for 2 years, he wrote to me, quote, "Much as I hate child molesters, called chomos in prison, one time the guards put one in with us. When I realized what was up, everything went deadly quiet. I knew these two guys were fixing to pop more holes than a sieve in this geeky, nerd-looking dude and slice him up, so I got off my bed and went straight at the dude. When I got in his face, I said, 'You sick chomo maggot piece of blankety blank, I'm gonna kill your blankety blank ass,' and slapped him and said under my breath, 'Run for the door, they're gonna kill you.' They locked me up for assaulting him, but I didn't care because those two killers would have killed him." Roy, sexually molested as a child, ended up in the hole for 30 days for saving the life of a child molester. A few other men convicted of murder joined our partnership, and one by one turned their lives around. You can hear these men tell their own stories in our book, St. Badass, Personal Transcendence in Tucker Max Hell. I'm going to show you.
Can you read that?
Well, bro, I broke those chains. I'm freer now, life without parole be damned, than I've ever been. I have realized that being alive here and now is the greatest of all feelings. If I feel pain and sorrow, I embrace that too, because that's what allows me to know I am human. John Bruno. Besides doing good by being kind, Buddhism also emphasizes mindfulness and meditation, which have a number of health benefits, both physical and psychological. When being mindful, we are able to quickly shift our attention away from distracting and upsetting thoughts about the past and future. Instead, our attention is free to determine how best to cease from evil and do only good in the present moment. In other words, mindfulness is extremely useful in stopping our unkind habits and building kind habits. Without mindfulness, our biases and self-absorption can prevent us from knowing how best to be kind, to form a close, caring relationship. For example, a Boy Scout told his Scoutmaster that he had been kind by helping an elder lady cross the street. The Scoutmaster agreed the action had been kind and added that it had been a little trivial. The Boy Scout protested. No, it wasn't easy at all. She did not want to cross the street. So the point of mindfulness is to pay attention to what effects you actually have on the other person, rather than acting from your biases and prejudices and self-absorption. Only gradually, even with my own practice, did I begin to see how I use my unkind habit of anger and ridicule to force others to cross the street against their will. And it took many years of work for me to soften my own anger. And I saw then, in increasing cases, it became clear to me when I was causing harm to others because I could be mindful. So the purpose of mindfulness is not, as it's currently portrayed today, primarily to make you feel better and solve all your problems. The purpose of mindfulness, in a genuine sense, is to free you up to know how to be kind. Gottman described what kept relationships from being close and caring. For every unkind act, there's only one kind act. But with loving couples, for every unkind act, there are 5 kind acts. What unkind acts are most common in a disastrous, unkind relationship? Contempt, criticism, defensiveness, and stonewalling. For example, if the wife says, Ellen gave me some pieces that are working really well for her, the husband might reply, it will take more than a few new seeds for you to grow anything. So that's this contempt and criticism and negativity. So what I'd like for you to do now is I'd like you to take a moment to think about an unkind habit that you would like to change in your life. So I've written a second book that details how to become mindfully kind. So the book with the prisoners is to me, it was inspiring to me to learn from them about the value and the power of mindful kindness. But my second book is more like an instructional book on how do we learn to become mindfully kind. Whoops, wrong one. Let's try this one. We live in a chaotic world full of unanswered questions and uncertainty that can overwhelm us. But there is a key to unraveling the fear that keeps us from the answers and having a happy, fulfilling life. A key we have known for millennia, a key that resides within us. That's the book. Discover a proactive way of living that leads to sustainable happiness, based on careful research in scholarly fields from biology to psychology, linking together religions across the world over thousands of years, all with one thing in common: kindness. You'll soon know why this slide is here. It may be a little while, but we'll get to it. The third Buddhist pure precept is, I vow to do good for others. My interpretation of this precept is somewhat unconventional. I vow to help others learn to do good by being mindfully kind. In other words, I will do more than being mindfully kind to my friends. I will help my friends learn to be mindfully kind to their friends. So it's not enough. It's a wonderful thing to be mindfully kind, don't get me wrong. But we have a greater responsibility, and that is to help other people learn to be mindfully kind so that mindful kindness spreads. And that is my interpretation of the third precept. And we do this through what I call the 3 M's. With kindness and with mindful kindness, we can mention it, we can motivate people to learn about it, we can mentor people in learning how to do it. So as an example, a retired senior citizen might mention, motivate, or mentor someone in the workplace about mindful kindness. I'm going to use Adam Grant's research on corporations. He identified people as belonging to one of 4 types. 1, doormats. Doormats let people walk all over them. Takers, those who take advantage of others. Matchers. I used to be a matcher with Linda. My lovely wife's here, Linda. And what a matcher is it my turn to do the dishes or her turn? Oh, I'm not going to do the dishes, it's your turn. That's a matcher. You're keeping score all the time. And after reading his research and recognizing I was a matcher, I changed that. It's really much better not to be a matcher. The last type is the kind type, the sustainable givers. Of the 4 types, the kind, sustainable givers, quote, are usually the most successful people in business. They may also be the happiest. Givers experience more meaning in their work than takers or matchers. A large experimental study in a Spanish corporation found that the givers of kindness were more satisfied with their lives as well as their jobs. The receivers of kindness in this research became happier and did 3 times as many more kind acts as did the control group. Sadly, only about 8% of the workers in this country see themselves as givers at work. Quote, most people think it's safer to operate like a taker or a matcher at work. Sustainable givers, they think, are chumps who will fall behind in the game of life. So motivating employees to want to learn about mindful kindness will be challenging, to say the least. Probably the most difficult employees to motivate to learn about mindful kindness are prison staff. A few prison staff in Oregon are learning mindfulness to better endure their work day to day and thus avoid suicide and an early death. The suicide rate among prison employees is about 40% higher than the suicide rate for the average occupation. Not surprisingly, prison staff do not learn anything about kindness in terms of relating to prisoners or to each other. My surprising discovery is that when prisoners are kind to prison staff, a few of the staff become more kind. Prison staff who increase their kindness and improve their relationship with prisoners and other workers are also improving their resilience and therefore may live longer. Therapist and mindfulness teacher Linda Graham, the author of Bouncing Back, stated in an interview that, quote, the brain becomes more resilient anytime we steadily cultivate the positive pro-social emotions like gratitude, kindness, compassion, and serenity. So as the prisoners in our mindful kindness partnership learned to practice kindness to prison staff, they were giving the prison staff the opportunity to in turn act with more kindness. Roy wrote extensively about how Buddhist-inspired mindfulness kindness leads to caring relationships with prison staff. Quote, "The guards I've seen change for the better aren't the sharpest as far as education goes, but they can read people real good. He found that he was able to win over even skeptical, hardened guards when they saw he was real and sincere in his acts of kindness. It wasn't always easy. On one occasion, a group of guards ransacked his cell in search of contraband, deliberately smashed his radio, only to realize then that they were in the wrong cell. Instead of reacting with anger or lodging a complaint, Roy accepted their apology. Quote, 'I just stayed calm and exercised patience,' he wrote later. You have to show them by being a Buddha in all your thoughts and actions. I might be the only encounter with Buddhist teachings that someone has in his life, so I need to properly represent Buddha with my character, behavior, and actions. I must be mindful that hate is only overcome with love, not more hate or anger." I found out when Linda and I flew to Arkansas to visit Roy, who was suffering from severe health problems that have gotten much worse since then. But while we were standing talking to him in a visiting area through a 4-inch thick bulletproof glass, a burly, tough-looking sergeant poked his head into the room, came up to us and politely interrupted our conversation and asked if we would encourage Roy to eat more because he was wasting away. Later, Roy wrote to me about a prison nurse he had befriended who quit her job in protest when higher-ups refused to give him his pain medication. On another occasion, he told me about 4 guards who came to visit him when he was treated in the prison infirmary. He wrote, "They stayed late just to talk to me. Yeah, there is some compassion in this compound of anger and hate." Maybe the greatest kindness Roy shows to the prison staff is through his example. He described an encounter with a guard who approached his cell while he was in meditation, something he practiced more and more as a means of coping with his pain. With his eyes still closed, Roy became aware she was standing at the door when he smelled her perfume. Quote, she said, "Tester, is you breathing when you do that meditation? Because I can't tell if you're breathing." "Yeah, Sarge, I'm breathing, but just real shallow. The deeper I get, the less breathing I do." Then she asked, "How many times a week do you do it?" I told her every day, at least twice a day, sometimes 3 or 4 times a day, at least 20 minutes at a time, but usually a half hour more. I told her the longer I meditate, the deeper I get. She said, "Well, shit, then what?" I said, "I try to get deep enough so I am you and you are me and we're no longer two but one energy and one with everything and everything." She laughed and said, okay, that's enough Buddha for me today. Here's them nice peoples wrote you a thick-ass letter. This is about the Harvard study. When the study began, nobody cared about empathy or attachment. But the key to healthy aging is relationships, relationships, relationships. And for prisoners and prison staff, close relationships may be the key to them staying alive long enough to grow old. During my 35 year at the University of Oregon, as Dan mentioned, I focused my kindness on improving the education of vulnerable children, those with disabilities, living in poverty, learning English, suffering from racism. Being retired now, most of my volunteer work focuses on vulnerable adults. As our country becomes increasingly diverse and the gap between the rich and the poor widens, we need more people at all levels of government and industry to value kindness, particularly kindness for those who have the greatest needs. For example, many adults, such as Roy, suffer from trauma caused by an abusive and neglectful childhood. One of my volunteer roles is to serve as president of the board of the nonprofit Generation PMTO that gives abusing and neglecting parents skills that allow them to reunite with their children. Hundreds of counselors applying Generation PMTO's scientific findings around the world to decrease child abuse. Abusive parents are learning how to replace violence and anger with parenting skills such as encouraging positive behavior, family problem solving, positive involvement, limit setting, and monitoring. Both the parents and the children benefit. It's fascinating to see in one study where they trained single mothers going through divorce that 9 years later, not only were the children dramatically changed, but the women had higher incomes, less incarceration, and if they remarried, a more satisfying marriage. Still, probably less than 1% of the parents that need this training receive it. If the parents of my incarcerated friends in St. Badass had those skills, most of these men would not be in prison today and their victims would still be alive. I will be signing copies of my 2 books after this, and the profits from that will be donated to Generation PMTO. As senior citizens, regardless of our religion, we have more empathy because we have lived long enough to feel more pain in ourselves and others. And now we have more time to do unto others as we do unto us. The Buddhist precepts, 3 pure precepts I've talked about, are one way to act on the golden rule that all religions share. First, unkind habits keep us from being mindfully kind, so we must cut back and stop our unkind habits. Second, we do good by being mindfully kind and volunteering and in developing habits that lead to close, caring, responsible, and respectful relationships. Third, as we become more mindfully kind in our lives, we do for others by mentoring, motivating, and mentioning how they can learn to be more mindfully kind. I'm going to end now. Those are the 3 pure precepts. With this inspiring story of unrequited love between a goat and a dog who regularly played together. After the 2 played together, the dog, remember I talked about oxytocin, it's a love hormone? After the 2 played together, the dog had a 48% increase in oxytocin. This moderate change in oxytocin suggested the dog viewed the goat as a friend. More striking was the goat's reaction to the dog. The goat had a 210% increase in oxytocin. Evidently, the goat was in love with the dog. And that proves that love can still blaze up in us, old goats, like Stan and I. Thank you. You want to take questions? Any questions? Yes.
I might add to that, the latest medical research shows that the acidity in your blood, the pH value, varies as your emotions. And if you want to live a long life, you have to get your acidity, your pH, more not normal, 7.25 instead of 6.5, which most of us have. Your emotions are principal in whether you get that acidity in your blood. That creates arteriosclerosis, which leads to heart problems, which leads to mental problems. So what you're saying is just now being proved in medical science is the fact that your emotions will determine how long you live, how long your telomeres are based upon the pH in your blood. I advise all of you to go check it.
Yeah, there's a lot of medical research now that's consistently pointing to the importance of kindness, and kindness is the key to relationships, and relationships is being shown over and over again as being a fundamental factor in our healthy and happy lives. And all of us here, I assume, are quite privileged. So, and the fact you're here means you have concern for paying back for the privilege that we have by helping others. Is another question?
I just wondered if you'd tell us a little bit more about your project with sponsors and what Sponsors is.
Sponsors is a nationally recognized model for reentry. Eugene, I assume most of you are familiar with the book Dead Man Walking, Sister Helen Eugene's book. Well, she spoke in Eugene a few years ago at a fundraiser for sponsors, and she said she speaks all over the country, and every time she speaks, someone will come up and say, I have a husband or a wife or a child who's leaving prison, what can I do? And she says, I never have anything constructive I can say unless I'm in Eugene. Because if I'm in Eugene, I can tell them to call Sponsors. So Sponsors is a remarkable reentry program for prisoners being released back into Lane County. I'm teaching a small seminar with residents at the Oaks. The Oaks is an unusual, very unusual new apartment complex in Eugene, and here's why it's unusual. You can't live there unless you are a felon. It was funded to give housing because one of the most accurate predictors of recidivism is coming out of prison with no place to stay and no job. So I'm actually meeting with a small number of residents there, and we're going through my book, How Love Wins. And it's been a very, I've learned a lot, and I think they're learning a lot. Yes?
Thank you for your talk. This reminds me of, too, of something that Dean Ornish, a cardiologist down in the Bay Area, came up with 15 or 20 years ago as he helped cardiac patients recover without surgery. And he had two questions he would ask all the people that came to his center. And one was, are you a member of a group that meets on a regular basis? And the second was, do you gain any strength from your religious faith or your spiritual practice? And if the answer to both questions was no, those people had about an 8 times greater chance of dying post his being there than others who both questions were answered yes, which reinforces what you're saying about relationship.
Yeah. And it's, I think the point of it is that we have a responsibility to share that. There's a lot of promotion about exercise and nutrition, but there's a lot more promotion about buying things. We really have a problem that we're so focused on things. I have a friend who's a retired judge who was writing a column about the shootings. And he was writing about causes, and I started thinking about it. I said, when we were young, we didn't have TV. And now we're bombarded with literally thousands of advertisements. And the thing to keep in mind is, it doesn't matter what it's advertising. The message is always the same thousands of times, and that is, if you buy something, it will fix it. And it doesn't matter what you buy. The message is buying things. And that moves us away from relationships. So our challenge is very severe because we're competing with literally thousands of messages that the answer is buying things, whether it's a heart medication or a Toyota or whatever it happens to be. Yes?
There's a group here in Eugene called Carnine. It's a trade organization, and if you have something in excess or something you want to share, you post it on the Carnine website. And if you need something, you post your request, whether it's a new pillow or a bicycle, or I just gave away a bunch of raspberry plants that were in excess, and I've given away building materials and other things that I haven't needed. And the result is people come up my driveway and we have a lovely little talk for half an hour or so, and I meet somebody interesting and new. And it's about sharing goods without any money, and it creates relationships. So if any of you are interested in participating, a lot of the people are a little flaky and quirky, but it's just a fun thing to participate in, to get and give.
So spell that. So
Kindista, Kindista.
.com.
Yeah, just Google it.
Yes.
Can you tell us how you either became or connected with Buddhism?
Yeah.
How did that happen for you?
I was a sophomore at the University of Illinois, and my girlfriend dumped me. And I was miserable. And I had thoughts going around all the time in my mind. I couldn't get rid of them. And so a very good friend of mine, in fact, a friend who Linda and I just visited a couple of weeks ago, who lives in California, was reading a book, The Essentials of Zen. And what struck me about the Zen practice, and I think it probably came across in my talk today, is it focuses on practical things you can do. It doesn't emphasize a belief system. It emphasizes how you act in the world. And I thought, this might get me out of this loop. And it did help. And that's how I started.
Thank you.
Yes?
Doug, most people here, I guess, were in church yesterday, but the sermon yesterday was, which is more important, to follow Jesus or believe in Christ? And I think what you just said also expresses the answer to that question from a Buddhist point of view.
It's interesting because I speak each year to a high school class at Thurston High School, and that's the question I ask them. Because I say, this is a Buddhist practice, this is following Christ. And how does that differ from just believing in Christ? So that's fascinating. Good timing.
As Christians, we hold Jesus in some regard, in a special regard, and varies from person to person. How do you hold Buddha, and how is that? What's the spectrum of how people view Buddha in Buddhism?
In my particular practice, we see Buddha as a man who found something and was a wonderful man and a wonderful teacher, and therefore we are very grateful and respectful. But there is a full spectrum. There are Buddhist practices who chant to get something. You know, they want something out of it. So you'll find the diversity in Buddhism that you'll find in Christianity in terms of what's in it for me, in terms of why people are involved. So Buddhism too has a very wide perspective. We're probably on one end where it's very practically oriented, lots of gratitude and respect, and on the other end is, I want to get, I'm going to chant to Buddha and I'm going to get a new Mercedes Benz or something. So it's pretty wild.
You mentioned recidivism. What is the difference in recidivism between, say, a murderer and a minor felon? I've heard the fellow called something...
Paul Solomon?
Yes, talk about this. He'd much rather hire a murderer coming out than he would a minor felon. Because the murderer will not go back where the minor felon will.
I don't know the statistics, but the personal experience I've had with one of the John Bruno quotes that I read to you was trained to be a sociopath. His father would have the children go out and pick a pet. They'd raise the pet for a year, and then the father would force them to murder the pet. So I don't know what the statistics are. It's probably true, but there are people who, for various reasons, are very dangerous. Although he called it his Timberwolf self, and he has, I think, tamed it, but he had a lot of work to do.
There was a prison down in one of the southern states, I don't remember, Alabama maybe, that incorporated Vipassana amongst its prisoners, and it was a great success.
Yes.
In those, do you know if any of those programs are still in place, or were they let go?
I don't know whether that one's still continuing or not, but I do know there's actually a lot of work being done in Oregon to train nonviolent communication with prisoners, which is very helpful, and there's some with meditation and mindfulness. So if there are any other questions later, I'll be glad to stay behind, or if you want a book, let me know, but I think people need to leave, so we'll call it to a close.
Thank you.